Hello, hope you're doing great. This is Maria Panni Rajan, your friendly software developer, and in this video, we're going to talk about functions. So, functions enable us to create useful functional units for our application. So, what do I mean by that? So, let's say, you're driving a car. So, when you're driving a car, there are many functional units available at your disposal, right? Like you have the accelerator. So if you press the accelerator, the car moves forward, and then you have a brake, right? So when you press the brake, the car stops. Now the important thing to note here is you don't necessarily need to know everything that is happening under the hood when you press the accelerator, right? So you don't need to know about the wirings, and you don't need to know like how all the engineering is happening to make the car move forward. All you need to know as a driver is if I press this accelerator, the car moves forward. As in, if I give this input of this pressure, if as a car driver, if I give an input to this functional unit, it'll return to me a value which is basically the acceleration of the car. So that's one way of looking at how functional units enable us to drive our application. So basically, a function is a functional unit, like a functional entity that accepts input, just as how the accelerator in a car accepts the pressure from the like the user. A functional unit, a function, basically accepts input and uses those inputs to compute a useful value and returns it back to the user. So that's basically what a function does in a nutshell. Now let's look at some examples to see this in action. Let's say like we are creating an application which would greet the user, right? So how would we go about it? So let's say we are using the print statement. So using the print statement, we can directly write, "Hello Tom, have a good day." Now when we execute this code, we can see that we are in fact getting the same statement printed on the terminal. But this line is like fully hard coded, right? You have no way to dynamically change the name of the user, or like the greeting type, like instead of good day, let's say you want to say have a good morning, because right now everything's hard coded. So instead of using this hard coded print statement, we can make use of functions, right? So let's create a function which would basically greet the user. Now the Python syntax to create a function would be like def meaning definition. So basically in Python the functions are called definitions. All right, so def is like the short form of definition, which in turn means function. All right, so def, which is the keyword, and then the name of the function. Let's call our function greet. All right, and then we would need to follow it with this curved parenthesis. All right, so and then we need our colon and then our indentation. So now anything that we type inside this indented block of code is part of this function. All right, so here what we would do now is we will move this print statement inside this function. Now as soon as we move this inside the definition, right, if we now execute the Python application, we can see that like nothing's getting printed, because after we like define a function like this, we will need to call it. All right, so only when we call a function, that function gets executed. So the name of the function is greet, so let's call it. All right, so let's call it greet. By doing this, and if we run the code now, we can see that yes, as expected, the block of code that is inside the definition is getting executed, and we have our greeting statement. But still, this is hard coded. I mean, this still, we just moved the print statement from outside to inside a definition. Nothing's dynamic about it, right? As we have previously talked about, the awesome thing about a function is it can accept inputs, process it, and return a useful value back to us. So how can we give inputs to this definition and accept a useful value back from it? So the way we do it is by means of using arguments. All right, so there are primarily two different types of arguments that I use. So one is the the regular arguments, and then we have the keyword arguments. So let's see both in action right now. So in order to make this definition accept inputs and return a value back to us, we just need to change the definition a bit. So the arguments that our function requires is basically the name, and then the type of greeting. So the way we create arguments is by means of declaring them inside these parentheses. So the first argument would be the name. All right. So this is basically a variable. All right. You can just this value can store anything, and you can just as a matter of fact, you can even name it anything like ping pong or any anything for that matter. Like, all right. So but name it appropriately so that it's useful. So basically right now the first argument is the name. The second argument we will make it as a keyword argument. So basically like when you have multiple arguments like here, we would need to separate them with commas. All right. So the second argument is basically type of greeting. So that's the second argument. And the cool thing with keyword arguments is you can have a default argument. All right. So what does that mean? So let's say in our case we give the default argument to be good day. What would happen here is when you're calling the function, you are compulsorily expected to supply only the the regular argument. In our case, you just need to give the name compulsorily. This second argument, which is a keyword argument, is now optional because it already has a default value as well, right? And that could be used if no value is given for the second keyword argument. So the first argument would be, let's say instead of Tom we will say Jerry. All right. And the second argument, let's just leave it as such for now. We will not even pass any second argument. Let's see what happens. And now in order to see something useful, we need to make use of these arguments in our print statement, right? So let's just do a bit of string formatting. So now if we run this code right now, we can see that it is actually saying hello Jerry, have a good day. And it is making use of Jerry, which we passed in when we called that particular definition. And since we do not pass any keyword argument right for this type of greeting, it is just making use of the default value, which is good day over here. Let's just change the keyword argument to be good morning. All right. So the way we do that is by means of actually typing in the keyword, and within the quotes we will just write good morning. So now when we run the code, we can see it is printing hello Jerry, have a good morning. All right. So instead of good day, because we have specified the value for the type of greeting. So as we discussed earlier, now we are able to supply inputs to our function, and based on the values that we give as arguments, the function is dynamically printing this greeting message. But actually when you think about it, this printing is still happening inside the definition. The definition is not yet returning any value back to us. So how do we actually return values back out of the function? Because right now nothing is getting returned out back from the function. So in order to return values back out of the function, we make use of the keyword return. What we would do is, instead of printing the value directly inside the definition, we would just return the string out. Now what's going to happen is, if we run the code again, you can see that nothing is getting printed. Even though we are calling this greet definition and this line of code is executed, it has formatted the string and it has returned the value back to us. We are not capturing it anywhere, right? So that's the reason it's nothing is getting printed. So here what we need to do is we need to capture the string and then print it. So we can capture the string either by means of using a variable name, or we can directly use the print method, right? So we can just say print, and you can see that the print itself is a function, right? We give this function which we have created as an argument. So what is going to happen is, when this the print statement is executed, it goes and sees the argument, which is greet, which by itself is a function. So it calls that function. So it goes over here, and by means of using the arguments that we have supplied, it formats a string, returns it back to basically this particular line. Since the print statement accepts a string value, it just prints that value to the terminal. If you run this now, we can see that yes, as we expected, the print statement is getting this particular string, which is returned from the function as an argument, and it is printing it to the screen. So if this is a bit ambiguous, let's just make it even more simpler. All right. So let's just capture it with a variable and just use that. All right. We just create a variable called greeting string, and we will just move this function over here. So basically now it's more clear, right? So this particular function calls gets the string, and that string is stored in this variable called greet_string. And what we will do now is we'll just print this variable. So this is another way to look at it. And even now when we run the code, we can see that our dynamic greeting is getting printed on the terminal. So yes, so this was a small introduction into the world of functions in Python. I hope this video was useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.